If you're interested in learning about rental scams and what scammers are doing to landlords, this is the episode for you. All right, welcome to another episode of the Accidental Landlord Podcast. I'm your host, Peter McKenzie, and today we are talking about rental fraud and what happens with it. What are the causes of it? What does it do for everyone else? Those types of things. So, everybody is up in arms on all sides of the argument or spectrum on the high cost of housing. Whether you're to buy a house, rent a house, lease a house, it doesn't matter. It's expensive. And, there are the obvious reasons, but sometimes that's not the only explanation. This issue is very nuanced. There's a lot of different facets to it. Depending on your political persuasion, people believe different things to be true in regards to housing and why things are the way they are. And we're going to get into today just one of those topics, and this is rental fraud. People trying to scam housing providers out of rent and living in properties without paying the rent and getting into the properties when they don't qualify, those types of things. And in the interest of all fairness, we believe here at our company that, tenants aren't bad, renters aren't bad, landlords aren't bad. People, generally speaking, are good. There are bad actors. There's really bad landlords. There's really bad tenants. There's really bad vendors. There's really bad corporate landlords. There's really bad mom and pop landlords. There's bad, and bad's not even the best term, but there are, less than ideal players on all sides of the equation. What we're going to do today is talk about a particular area that we believe impacts the price and the cost of housing, which anything that makes housing go up is potentially bad for someone who's trying to rent a house. And frankly, it's not the best thing for the landlord either, because good landlords want to offer good housing options at an affordable price where they can make a little money, the tenants can survive and not feel like they're paying all of their money towards rent, and the whole system works as it's designed, if you will. I think the problems come in when there are things out of everyone's control that negatively impact the price that makes this arrangement difficult. And it doesn't get more personal than where you lay your head every night. So people are passionate about their views and their beliefs when it comes to the reasons why the housing market is out of control. We're just going to get into the problem of rental fraud. And there was an article that came out recently, I believe, the beginning of May on USA Today. And the title of the article, and we'll link to it down below, is Why Fraudsters May Be Partly Behind Your High Rent and Other Problems at Home. And it struck my interest. I immediately read it and started thinking about it, and we need to bring this on the podcast and have this conversation because it's worth having. There are a lot of assumptions made in the article, some of them that we agree with, some of them that we don't, but we're going to kind of go through it loosely. If you want to read the article itself, it's not a long read. It's maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and you can do that as well. But first, let's get into the problem. So I think everybody can agree that, housing is expensive. And frankly, everything is expensive. And I think universally people understand what inflation is, how inflation is impacting things. Obviously, we had some hyperinflation, after the COVID-19 pandemic, and, they were printing money and things were good when the money was free. And then all of a sudden the prices went up. And then we started seeing a lot of these other problems. But when it comes to high rents, inflation is a factor. Low supply is a big driver of the reason why the rents are so high. High demand, along with low supply, another big reason why prices are so high. But the thing that we're going to talk about today is how fraud also contributes to high cost of housing. There was a survey done by the National Multifamily Housing Council that found that nearly all respondents, almost all, 93% of them that own homes and apartment complexes have experienced rental fraud in the past year. Now, that's an astounding statistic. The majority of housing providers have experienced rental fraud in the last year. That kind of shakes my belief in that people are generally good and do the right thing. Obviously, there's probably more to that statistic, but in general, it paints a picture for sure. So let's talk about the different kinds of frauds, or the type of fraud that we're going to be talking about specifically, because there's a lot of ways to be fraudulent when it comes to housing. I mean, there's people who squat in properties. There's people who will lease you somebody else's property. That's not really what we're going to talk about today, but there is a wide range of nefarious activities that go under this topic. But what we're going to talk about today is something called synthetic fraud. We'll get into what that is. But essentially, we have potential renters having fake IDs and applying to rent properties with malicious intent. And that's bad for obvious reasons. I think we can all agree that committing crime is bad. Like, using a fake ID to enter into a legal contract is illegal and generally speaking bad. What we're not addressing here is these typically aren't a nice family looking for a place to live and raise their children and live a peaceful life and, go about their business. These are usually people who are trying to do bad things, whether it's deal drugs out of a house or sex trafficking or, parties or an illegal Airbnb or any number of negative things that most people can agree you wouldn't want to be neighbors with, right? So that's why when people use fake identities, it hurts. It not only hurts the landlord financially. Well, let me back up a sec. Let's say this is somebody doing this. They get a fake ID with a fake credit report. They apply to rent a property. They get into the property because the landlord or the owner didn't do a good job screening the application, which we'll get into later. And then inevitably, most of the time, once they get into the property, they stop paying the rent at some point because they're not doing all this fraudulent activity to just pay their rent on time every month and live a quiet, peaceful life. No, they're doing it to get into the property so they can stop paying the rent and go about doing whatever it is that they're doing. That's the problem. That hurts the landlords financially, but it also is bad for the neighbors. Think of, whether it's an apartment right next to yours or the house right next to yours. It's bad for honest tenants who are just trying to live their lives. So that is, in essence, what we're going to be talking about today. And by the way, if you've been a victim of this fraud, or you have some intimate knowledge or how this works, or you have some horror stories surrounding this, please reach out to us because we would love to bring on some real world examples onto the podcast. It's podcast@rinconmanagement.com. If this is something that's happened to you or you have firsthand knowledge of, we'd love to talk to you. Let's talk about what happens to everyone else when these frauds take place. So they use these fake identities, they get into the properties with malicious intent, they stop paying the rent, they're, making it very difficult for everyone around them. So that you could argue that that's bad for the landlord. You could also argue that that's bad for the neighborhood. But sometimes these negative impacts go far beyond that. Landlords can lose tens of thousands of dollars per incident. So think of it this way. In our market, your average, single family house rents for $3,500 a month. This happens. Sometimes it takes months and months and months to get these tenants out for the law to run its course and to evict people who are doing these types of things. Well, in the process, the landlord's not collecting rent. A lot of the times the tenants are causing major damage to the property, whether they're, it could be any number of things. A lot of times utilities, are never turned on, or, they don't pay for the water bill. There's actual damage in the house. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. So if you have a landlord who has this happening to them, let's say this is their only property, they don't collect rent for multiple months. They have to go in there and fix up the property. I mean, we've seen horror stories where it could be $10,000 fixed up. It could be $100,000 to fix the property up, anywhere in between. If you have your average, in our area, landlord, which is not, someone who has a ton of money, who has his houses paid off, for the most part, landlords in our area, newer landlords, have a mortgage. They typically are, maybe if they're lucky, a break even, meaning the rent that they receive covers the cost of holding the property. But I'm here to tell you that a good majority of them are negative cash flow, meaning they might have to bring money to the table just to keep the property. So the rent does not cover the holding costs. If someone like that experiences a $50,000 loss between lost rent and damage to the property, they typically don't have the financial resources to handle that. What is probably going to happen here is they're going to end up selling the house under distress, and then that property is going to be taken off the rental market, which exacerbates the problem of low supply, low rental housing available to everyone. So that's how it works for a small little mom and pop that maybe has one property. Well, what if this is a larger corporate apartment complex, or someone that's a little more sophisticated, has multiple properties? a lot of the times they build this risk into how they price their property. So, and this is not a conversation about rent control. In fact, our previous podcast went over rent control. If you're interested in that, please go back to look at that one. It's Senate Bill 567. It's the one just prior to this. What I mean by that is if you're a landlord and you own 20 properties, and you know that out of those 20 properties, occasionally you're going to have something like this happen to you, you're more than likely going to raise the rents on everybody else to offset the risk and exposure you have when something like this happens to you. Barring, making sure that they're following the rent control laws, which is what we always recommend, there's still room to increase rents to offset this type of risk. So I liken this to the scenario of like retail stores. When retail stores, especially this is a big problem in the inner cities or the big cities right now, where they have so much shoplifting going on that they have a constant loss from people stealing from them, that they have no choice but to raise prices. Well, that just raises prices on the people who are doing the right thing and paying for the goods and services they get from a business. Same principle applies here. If this keeps happening more and more and more, what do you think the landlords are going to do? They have to price this extra risk into their product, which usually happens in the form of higher rent, which is bad for tenants, bad for the people that are essentially getting screwed over by the people who are doing these horrible things. Okay, the question comes up, why are we seeing an increase in this? And there absolutely is an increase in this type of behavior. In my opinion, this is related to a lot of things. One, COVID-19, the pandemic, really put a spotlight on these types of things, because when the states and the counties and the cities and everybody, and the federal government for that matter, came out and said, you can't evict anybody, we're not going to allow evictions during the pandemic, fraudsters knew that if they were able to get into these properties, that they were not going to be kicked out anytime soon. So all they had to do was get in. There was more incentive for someone that was willing to do this to get into a property, because in a non-COVID-19 time where there is no eviction moratorium, someone could do this, they could get into the property, but the landlord is going to go through the court systems and get them evicted. It might take a couple months, but it's better than a couple of years when all these eviction moratoriums were in place. So because people knew that they couldn't get evicted out of properties, there was a huge increase in this. And then the eviction moratoriums just made it more and more appealing to them. So there is this thing obviously our business is property management, and we deal with landlords and tenants and vendors on a daily basis. It always seems that there are people that are trying to defraud you. And this is just a different type of fraud, but we show vacant properties, right? And vacant properties they are frequently targeted by people in other countries that are trying to fake rent them out to gullible people who go, hey, I have this property for rent. I can't show it to you right now for something. You pick the excuse, but it's a really good price. It's usually half or less than half of what the fair market rent is. And if you fill out this application today and you're willing to wire these funds today, we'll make sure that it's your house. And most people will go, this is a scam. But some people, and those are the people they're preying on, don't. And now they just gave them their money and all of their personal identifiable information in the form of their rental application that they took. And now these people are targets for identity fraud and all kinds of other things. It feels like as a housing provider, we're always trying to stay a couple steps ahead of the fraudsters. But the reality is the fraudsters typically are a couple steps ahead of us. And what we're going to talk about next is an example of that. And it's called synthetic fraud. And what it is these bad people will get a certain piece of your personal information, whether it's your driver's license number or a social security number. They don't have to have everything. They just have to have something. Then they go use that information to create a new identity with someone else's name, with someone else's photo, right? So they kind of it's like half real, half fake. Once they get that information, they'll open up a credit card or two. And what we're seeing more of is people playing the long game. So not only are they just doing this for, you would think they would do it for a quick buck. No, they're taking these new identities and they are seasoning them with multiple cards. They're paying the cards. They're building up an actual credit history so that once they have that set, they can then go do more damage and probably net themselves a higher reward from their fraudulent activities. So that's what they're doing. And then once they have an established credit profile, they're adding additional users. And a lot of times you can add multiple users. So they're getting leverage by doing this. And then, this is exponentially just gives them more opportunities. This is the people that are doing these frauds. And so when they show up at your property and go, hey, I'd like to rent this property. Yeah, here's my application. Here's all my news or my information. They know you're going to run a credit check. They know it's going to come back good with good credit. What do you do then? And an unsuspecting landlord that's not sophisticated and doesn't, for lack of a better word, deal with this type of thing on a regular basis, those are the people that are getting taken advantage of. So that's the problem. It's really hard to go against that. So what do you do about it? If you're a landlord and you manage property on your own, you have to be diligent. You have to stay on top of these fraudsters. You have to know what the scam is in order to prevent it from happening to you. And like I was saying earlier, the scam's constantly changing because once somebody figures out one of the scams, guess what? They go find a new one or they make it better. They become more sophisticated. So how do you combat this? Here's the way to combat it, in my opinion. And I'll just kind of share with what we do and why, and hopefully that provides some value to you. So for starters, you need to have an identification verification system. Now, we're not tech geniuses. We don't have the funds or the knowledge to go do this on our own. However, we partner with excellent third parties that do this. In our case, we partner with a company called Findigs, Findigs, which is available. Like other people could partner with them as well, where they do have ID verification software and AI that runs these things through to try to pick out people that have made these synthetic fake accounts. That's one thing. The other thing is the number two things that most landlords, if they're not sophisticated, don't do is verify employment and check landlord references. Now, you might think this is the most basic thing in the world. It's been around forever. Of course, you should do those things. But I'm here to tell you from the colleagues that I have in the industry, the networking that I do, a lot of landlords and companies don't do this. There's a couple reasons why. One, if it comes to landlord references, some people think there is liability of giving a negative landlord reference, so they just choose not to, which in my opinion makes it difficult for landlords who are trying to screen tenants. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I hate to say it, but maybe a little bit of laziness, a little bit of apathy, because it is work. It's extra work that you need to do in order to make sure you're protecting yourself. So the two things, income verification and landlord verification. Let's talk about income verification. I'm here to tell you right now that we don't like pay stubs. Pay stubs are the worst thing you could use to verify income because actually this is a good exercise. Go online, type in, I need a fake pay stub, and see what comes up. I just did it. You can't see my screen, but you will see this if you're watching it on YouTube. If you're watching it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, feel free to go look at it on our YouTube feed. But immediately you are peppered with Google ads, which are companies that pay for these keywords. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, no less than 4 companies that are advertising a free fake pay stub online. Click on these companies. I don't want to call them out by name, but if you search this, you can find them yourself. And they have testimonials. They have all of the stuff that you would think should be hidden and hard for people to figure out is right there in the open. Things like your fake pay stub won't be detected. This is how you enter the information. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. So if you're a landlord who verifies income with pay stubs, stop. Don't do that. It's fine as a supporting piece of information, but the real way to verify employment is to contact the employer. And we don't ever contact the supervisor or the name of the person that the applicant presents to us, because that could very well be their friend, their relative, who's going to give you a fake reference over the phone. So do your own research. Find the employer online. If it's a reputable employer, they should be able to be found. And contact their HR department and go, hey, I'm trying to verify the reference of John Doe. Does John Doe work there? And that is a way to get around someone trying to give you a fake landlord reference. So you use the technology to verify the identification. You do a little bit of homework, i.e. contact the landlord or I'm sorry, not the landlord, the employer, without the information that was provided to you by the applicant. Those are usually pretty good to get to the bottom of things. Same thing if someone gives you an employment letter, like they haven't started their job, they're moving to your area, pick up the phone, call the company and figure that out. Okay, the other thing that you have to do is verify landlord references. This is touchy because, like I said earlier, most corporate landlords, the big apartment complexes, they'll just verify that that person used to live there. They won't tell you if they paid the rent on time. They won't tell you if they had to evict them, if they destroyed the house. They won't tell you those things because they're scared of possible liability that's associated with that. So what do? So sometimes when you have a corporate landlord, there's not a whole lot you can do other than confirm that they actually were tenants there. You then are going to have to rely on, is their credit score good? Do they have a history of paying their debts? Is their employment good? You're going to have to weigh those more than what the landlord said. The other trick is go to the second landlord. So not the primary landlord, which a lot of people put less weight on, because if you have a bad tenant, the primary landlord is going to potentially tell you that they're not bad because they want to get rid of them. So we usually weight the second landlord back higher because they don't have any skin in the game and they're more likely to be honest. But if you don't have a corporate landlord, which thankfully, corporate landlords is not a large section, there are a lot of people rent from mom and pop landlords. You do the same thing. You don't contact the information that the applicant gives you because it could be friends or family. You go to the public record. You find who owns the house. If the people who own the house in the public record, which is very, very hard to fraudulently show, somebody could, I'm sure, if they wanted to, but that's a lot of work. And then you reconcile that with the information they gave you. If it says Jane Doe owns the rental property and you figured that out from the public record, but they gave you a landlord of Mary whatever, those two things don't match up. You need to do a little digging in. You need to figure out why, that type of thing. So when you talk to the landlord, ask them when they bought the house. Ask them things, hey, when did you buy this house? And if they answer it, you see it in the public record and it's the same, then you pretty much are confident in the reference they're giving you. But for sure, if the owner of public record is not the same as the person they're giving you, that's a red flag that they're probably lying to you. One other thing I want to say is there's a company right now that they call themselves the trusted name in covert disinformation, and they will create a fake landlord reference for you, a fake job reference for you. They build this whole backstory. It's almost like clandestine CIA type stuff, and they charge for the service, but they're out in the open about how they're going to help you get approved by your landlord, even if you have all these negative things in your past. So just know that these people are working against you and they're trying to defraud you out of your peace of mind and your money. And they are sophisticated and they know what they're doing, which is why you as the housing provider have to level up and be just as sophisticated as them. So those are the things you want to make sure you're doing: actually verifying landlord references, actually verifying employment. And then the thing we didn't talk about, which that company Findigs does for us, but honestly, there's other providers that do the same thing, is when it comes to income verification, don't take what they say on the application as gospel. You need to verify it with bank activity. So people can alter bank statements and give those to you. People can alter tax returns and give those to you. But what they can't do is when you connect to their bank account and the software that they use to go back 2-3 years and analyze the income and expenses in their actual bank account, and then this software spits out a report to you that says, this is their income that they've made over this period of time. This is roughly how much they're spending. This is roughly how much they have left over. You then have a really good idea on how financially responsible this person is. And then you can also verify, are they lying on their application about their income? Now, if the income is off by like a few dollars, probably not a big deal. But if they tell you they make $20,000 a month and their income shows $5,000 a month through your bank analysis, then you know you have someone that's not being honest with you. If you do all of those things, the chances of you getting defrauded by people that do this are relatively low. The other thing that you can do as a landlord is to increase how strict your screening guidelines are. And what I mean by that is this, because the state is constantly trying to take things away from you, but what they haven't taken away from you is your standards. Like I rent to tenants that have a credit score of X, that have a income of X. Like in our case, it's 3 times the rent in documentable gross income. They can't have X amount in collections. They can't have an eviction. Certain criminal behavior excludes them, not all. You can't do a blanket criminal background that excludes everyone because that is against the law as well. So if you raise your screening standards, it improves your chances of getting a good tenant, which is ultimately the goal that housing providers want. So if you're going to manage property, in today's day and age, you need to invest in technology that allows you to do these things so you can find good renters who will take care of the property, and all of those types of things. The other thing that needs to happen here is you need a voice politically. Small mom and pop landlords need a better voice when it comes to talking with their state senators, assembly people. They need their voice because there's a huge pro-tenant advocacy right now, which is not a bad thing. Like tenants need, people advocating on their behalf as well, but we need to bring balance to it. We need more advocacy for the small mom and pop landlord. Now, your big giant hedge funds and VC-backed companies like BlackRock and Invitation Homes and these types, make no mistake, they have their lobbyists that are advocating for them. But they aren't necessarily in the best interest of a mom and pop landlord. They're doing their own things, running their own agendas. It's the local mom and pop landlords that are underrepresented. So obviously we think this rental fraud is a problem. It's a serious problem. It is impacting housing costs. I don't think it's the number one driver of high rents, but I don't think it's helping bring rents down. I do think it is putting upward pressure on rents, which is why we need to take it seriously and we need to prevent it. Everybody needs to work together, and not just landlords and owners of properties. The tenants need to work with each other. The landlords and tenants need to work together. The lawmakers, the technology providers that are giving these tools to housing providers. Everybody kind of needs to work together so that we can address this issue of rental fraud. But the bigger issue is of housing availability and housing affordability. It doesn't get better when we have people running around breaking the law, defrauding landlords, and causing these issues. It only makes it worse. That's why it's important that everybody works together. The other option you have as a landlord, specifically a mom and pop landlord, is hire a company, hire a property management company. That's good. Big caveat, because there's a lot of bad ones out there, that does all of these things for you. It's the ultimate form of leverage. It can be difficult. There's a lot of bad property management companies out there, but if you find a good one who understands the risks, who stays in front of these fraudulent activities, that can be a good way to mitigate your exposure to them. So if you're interested in having that conversation with our company, we manage properties in Ventura County. We're happy to have that conversation. That's a wrap on this issue. I do want to talk about some future upcoming episodes. We try to be fair. In fact, in our company, we are really intentional about treating all parties equitably and fairly, from the people who own the properties to the tenants who live in the properties to the vendors who work on the properties. Everybody is treated like a human. We don't subscribe to this landlord versus tenant adversarial relationship that is so common. And in fact, if you look at some of the comments on our previous podcasts, it shines through that there is a big conflict between landlords and tenants. And I think personally that it's because of these bad actors on both sides of the equation that cause it. We don't subscribe to that. We believe in treating everybody fairly. In the interest of that, I want to bring on some examples of terrible landlords, because I do not like bad landlords. I do not like slumlords, and they are absolutely out there. A lot of times they're the source, the impetus behind some of these laws, which in those cases, I don't even fault people for trying to create laws to stop some of these horrible things happening. We're going to bring some of those stories to light on some landlords that you just don't want to be like. The main reason is a teaching opportunity for other landlords to go, hey, that is really terrible, and that's not something that we're interested in doing, and we're just going to shed some light on that. So in the interest of fairness, we're going to bring some landlord horror stories on. We're probably going to bring some tenant horror stories where you have horrible tenants, because there's bad actors on both sides of the equation. I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any questions or on specifics we talked about, we'll link a couple of the companies and articles that we mentioned down below. Feel free to reach out, podcast@rinconmanagement.com. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to us and letting us help educate you when it comes to some of these complex issues. Thank you.